streaming. Haven't started recording also. All right, so for people that are joining us now on YouTube live stream, we've already done the prayers. I apologize for starting the recording late. So we had in the morning short event of global response to climate change, and I started saying that sometimes we are asked those questions: what is the Buddhist response to climate change? What is the Buddhist view on euthanasia? What is the Buddhist view on abortions and so forth? And I think that kind of the expectation is that there would be a formalized official response of Buddhism to a particular thing. But of course, those issues were not issues at the time of the Buddha. So it's not that Buddha actually spoke about many of those issues directly. So if you think, what does Buddhism say about climate change? It doesn't say much. What do we as Buddhists think about climate change? Well, we can formalize our opinions based upon our understanding of the teachings on, as Geshe said, the two aspects of dependent origination and non-violence. So it's rather than expecting Buddhism to have like a unified response. This is what we take into our practice, and something also applies to euthanasia. This is a topic that is common for us in the 21st century. When our pets are, for example, getting old, is it all right to put them down? When someone becomes sick, terminally sick, and they're suffering greatly, is it all right to go through a euthanasia process? Well, the Buddha did not speak about it. The Buddha spoke about not killing. But it's not that the Buddha was, I think, debating this idea of, is it all right when someone suffers so greatly to give an injection? It wasn't available at the time of the Buddha. It was not an issue. Is it all right to have, what's happening with IVF? Well, the Buddha didn't have IVF. It's not that the Buddha didn't have IVF. IVF did not exist at the time of the Buddha. So, what's happening with consciousnesses, how does it work, the moment of conception and so forth? Well, we can formalize our opinions, but if we think that we can find them in the Buddhist scriptures and the Buddhist teachings, it's likely not to be the case. Anyway, so Jason is asking me if I can add him to the recording list. I can consider that. All right, done. So I guess if we participate in such exchange, then of course it's good to be informed about what views we have in the Buddhist tradition, but also we need to be informed about the other topics. What's happening with euthanasia? What's happening with climate change? What does it mean to be an activist? How can you become an activist and still embodying Buddhist principles? I think that those are the interesting questions, rather than kind of just what does Buddhism think about climate change? It's more like, how can I affect the situation? How can I become an activist in one way or another, but still act based upon Buddhist principles? Buddhism is good on the change part. Yeah. I agree. Sorry? Everything is impermanent, yeah. So we can mess things up, and we can also at some point prevent that from happening. So having said that, today Geshe is going quite gentle with the text, which works, I think, right nicely for me when it gives me time to think about the material and think about how I integrate this material to the way that I think. But in terms of leading the tutorial, sometimes I think of what I'm going to change, since we didn't cover a lot of material. Geshe gave a lot of practical advice. I think that we can have discussions about them, but sometimes I don't have a lot of information to add on top of what Geshe said. So today we've covered the section that explains abandoning them by knowing the disadvantages. So up until yesterday, we looked at in general about the disadvantages of being attached to other sentient beings, to people and also to other living beings. The last thing that we've covered is that it causes one to waste the leisures and endowment. So one thing that I wanted to point out is that when you look at Shantideva's text, Getsadama Rinpoche's commentary, and also this book, which we often use, The Nectar of Manjushrie's Speech, which gives a commentary to this text from an enigma perspective, or kind of one of the students, I think, of the word of my perfect teacher, Dzal Rinpoche. So they give a commentary, first of all, from a monastic perspective, not only from a monastic perspective, from a male perspective. They give also a commentary from the perspective of mid-age Tibetan culture or setup. So our challenge is to make those teachings relevant to us. So it's not that we need to kind of think that they were taught by Tibetans, or they were taught in kind of old Tibet. They were taught in a monastic situation relevant to them, and therefore those teachings are not relevant to me. I think that the trick is to think of what commentary did they give, and then to tailor it to our situation, which makes it really interesting. This is where I think those teachings become much more interesting. So when we think of how does attachment to other beings cause us to waste our freedoms and endowments, or freedoms and richnesses, I think that we can think about it in different levels. I think that here, when you look at the commentaries that we use, I think that the underlying assumption is that when you see how futile personal relationship is, you're going to renounce that, become a monastic, go to a retreat place and practice in isolation. So of course, that's an ideal situation. You know, if you can do that, that's ideal for cultivating calm abiding, and also for other retreats that you want to do. That will give you the best scenario. But then most of us, even monastics, cannot do that. I mean, of course, at some level, monastics decide to give up personal relationship, but most of us do it actually, or many of us, I don't know if most of us, but many of us do that in already having had a relationship before. We know many of us have been married before. Many of us already have children. Many of us have family relationship, which makes it difficult to just cut and run, basically, right? It makes it more difficult. So how do we make sure that even if we do maintain some relationship with people around us, that we do not waste freedoms and richnesses? So what is the meaning of wasting freedoms and richnesses?
Be so taken by other relationships that they distract you from Dharma.
Yes, to be so taken by relationship that it becomes a distraction from Dharma. So in what way do you put to waste freedoms and richnesses? In what way do you waste them? They are put to waste. Do you say that? Put to waste?
Yes.
Okay.
Prioritize.
Yeah, prioritize. So
Don't prioritize the Dharma. Prioritize.
So then I think that if you prioritize the Dharma, it means that, at least from the point of view of a meditation on freedoms and richnesses, your goal would be to make meaningful the life of freedoms and richnesses. And from the point of view of the Lam Rim, your bare priority, your minimum priority should be next lifetime. So this lifetime is incidental, and the greater purpose is future lifetimes, and then liberation and enlightenment. So in some sense, we can say that being attached to others skews our priorities, in that we don't think about future lifetimes. We don't think about liberation and enlightenment. We focus only on what we can get in our interactions with others, but also with our possessions, our wealth, and so forth. Our priority still remains in this lifetime. So that's a major issue for us. That's why freedoms and richnesses is the second topic within the presentation of the Lam Rim, having relied upon a spiritual teacher. Then you start to think of a precious human rebirth with freedoms and richnesses. So, but then I think that for us, even though we can say that our priorities shift, they're shifting, they've already shifted, but for many of us, it's still work in progress, right? So even if our priorities, if we do consider future lifetimes and beyond, still, because of attachment, our practice becomes quite weak, isn't it? There are quite a lot of interruptions to what we want to do because of attachment. So even if we have that great purpose in mind, our attachment to things in this life make a practice quite weak. But even if we do try to practice because of attachment, when we sit to a meditation session, our mind is too discursive, right? Thinking of food and problems and money and work and so forth. So I think that on all those different levels, we can say that it go against making the most out of this attachment that we have to other people in this life, go against securing a great purpose.
I would say also it's not just our attachment to them, it's our attachment to their happiness, like them being attached to us.
Yeah.
You know, like I find that a real struggle. It's finding a balance between not just like discarding people because I want to practice.
Yeah.
But looking after the fact that they're attached to me, but they don't have the dharma, so they don't know how to do that.
Yeah, certainly.
And not hurting them or ignoring them or whatever. So that's like a constant struggle.
It is a struggle. It's I've been living far away from my family for almost 20 years. I lived in India for a few years. Now I live in Australia. So of course I talk to them every once in a while or every so often, depends on the situation. But sometimes I think that the expectation is that we should miss each other. And if you don't miss each other with that sense of attachment, it means that you don't care for them. So I speak sometimes with relatives and friends, and they say that, we really want to see you. We're kind of thinking of next time that we meet. And I think to myself, maybe I'm just a cold-hearted guy that can, it's like I can talk to them on the telephone or through Zoom or WhatsApp, and it feels all right. So I think that, as I said, it's also an expectation that we'll still maintain those connections, because otherwise it makes others unhappy. It's really difficult to avoid that, isn't it? To mitigate those relationships. I think that, in some sense, I find that when I became a monk, just by the virtue of wearing the robes and having to cut my hair and kind of being this exotic Buddhist monk, I have lesser expectations that actually I will abide by those social expectations. I mean, of course, there are still social expectations, and some of it is, are found within our Buddhist circles, right? So we still have also expectations within people in our community. Let's hang out. I have friends outside of the center, and sometimes I feel that I need to at least call them or see them, once a month, twice a month. Otherwise, kind of we're losing contact. Yeah. So Oli said, we distract ourselves with distractions. Maybe Oscar Wilde said that. It's a nice saying. Yeah. So then we're abandoning those we're abandoning those faults of attachment by thinking of the faults of attachment. So I was looking at this outline, and I thought that in some sense it works in this really strange way, because when you look at the points that says it destroy what could otherwise be very meaningful, do not rely upon the company of the childlike people, one does not obtain any benefit from it. It seems that we're continuing to think of the faults of attachment. But in some sense, you can say that it's still we're speaking about the faults of attachment. So there is a way of linking the disadvantages of attachment, of course, with abandoning them by recognizing those disadvantages. So the way that I think about it is actually what Geshe said today. So thinking of the faults of attachment, we also think of the things that we attach to and recognize that we cannot, there's nothing that we can rely upon. I mean, nothing that we can rely upon. Those things are unreliable. We have certain expectations, hopes or expectations, but since they're ephemeral, impermanent, at some point they will fail us, not give us the satisfaction that we need. We'll have to be separated from them. And as Shantideva says, even in this life, even if you're not separated from them through death, even in this life, this sense of attachment to others or to other things, it still gives you pain. So it destroys what could otherwise be very meaningful and leads one to the lower realm. So let's look at a verse. Friends and relatives lacking permanence will even destroy the everlasting Dharma. I think that this is in light of what we said now. So rather than kind of being resentful towards friends and relatives that they destroy my everlasting Dharma, I think that it's what we mentioned now. It's hard to really keep your priorities right, be completely intent on doing an effective Dharma practice, so long as we have attachment to friends and relatives. And I think that also, as Geshe said, I think I said it today or maybe last week, it's not that we need to cut our ties with friends and relatives. It's more like we can have relationship, but without a sense of attachment. If we can do that, that would be excellent, right? So without thinking that I need to have that relationship because they make me happy. To have a relationship because we care for others. And if we care for others, what it means is that if they need urgent help now, I'll do it. If they don't need urgent help now, I can become a Buddha, to benefit them later on, to a greater extent. So that's going to be my priorities, right? To work on my spiritual practice, so I'll be able to be of greater benefit to them. It doesn't have to be either this or that. We can combine it, but just have a more balanced approach. So they will destroy everlasting Dharma in a sense that they will change my priorities, and I will no longer seek with kind of this tight focus, the state of liberation or the state of enlightenment. If I behave in the same way as those equal in fortune to the childish. So let's look at the word childish. What does it mean in this context? They're not Aryas. Yeah, so that's one interpretation of the word childish. So
we'll say ordinary beings, but generally it's also not just that they're not Aryas, but they're also generally they have no interest in the Dharma.
So I think that all of us read through that commentary during the break time. Yeah.
They're not wise.
They're not wise.
Yeah. Yeah. We read through the same commentary. Yeah, so so in general, the word childish, in this commentary it says that childish could be someone that is just not old, but we're not really interested in that. From a Dharma perspective, childish are those who are not Aryas, which means ordinary sentient beings. Even Bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation could be called childish if they haven't realized emptiness perceptually, right? So the demarcation between childish and an Arya being is a perceptual realization of emptiness. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is that those who are not wise and learned would be childish. But I think that Geshe explained it went even further than that in saying that actually when you look at childish, it's someone that is not wise and learned from the perspective of being strongly susceptible to anger and attachment. Right, so of course,
sort of emotional immaturity.
Emotional immaturity, which On a personal level, I think that probably, even though I wouldn't call myself emotional immature, I do recognize that there's still some levels of attachment in some areas. I still have hostility towards certain things, certain people, and so forth. But does indeed go through the swings of anger and attachment, which is, it doesn't have to be going through the swings. You can say that when you look at the nature of society in general, and the people that people discuss within the family unit, within the workplace, what is common just in society, television, and so forth. It's quite common to have interactions with others on the basis of anger and attachment, and most people see no issues with that. I mean, it's quite interesting sometimes just to, when I look at the news, I normally just look at the headlines rather than actually reading the news. And as of late, there's been, I think that in every news outlet that I've been looking at, there are news about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And I was thinking that it's pretty fascinating how people are so fascinated by the whole thing. And you can see that I think that the whole basis of discussion has to do with anger and attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth. It's this discussion revolves around these afflictive states of mind. And actually, it seems that it becomes a legitimate discussion because it's motivated by those afflictive states of mind, without actually pointing out that this is what motivates this whole infatuation with this story. So when it refers here to childish, I think that it also refers to those who don't see any problems with that. So it's not that you necessarily need to be wise and learned like an elevated person. If you just kind of succumb to the social norms, I think that in that sense, you're not that wise from a Buddhist perspective. So Jane says that ordinary people are childish because they have no discerning wisdom, but are strongly affected by impartiality of anger and attachment. Yeah, definitely. Or childish, worshipped by the 8 worldly concerns. Yeah, actually, when I was thinking of also how we waste our leisures and endowments in relation to the previous point, one of the points that was thought of at home was the 8 worldly concerns. That's another way. Now, when we're being attached to affairs of this life, because of the 8 worldly concerns, in conjunction with the 8 worldly concerns, we lose sight. So, then this section says, in the extensive explanation beginning with, it destroys what could otherwise be very meaningful, the state of liberation and enlightenment. If I behave in the same way as those equal in fortune to the childish, it's a kind of really, I guess, convoluted way of saying that if I behave in a way that is similar to those who are affected strongly by anger and attachment, those who haven't realized the nature of things, those that haven't realized the nature of samsara, I will certainly proceed to the lower realms. So altogether, the 8th chapter of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life is speaking of how we create an ideal situation for cultivating calm abiding. So first of all, we need to abandon attachment. So even if we do not now live a lifestyle and go to a retreat and do a long-term retreat until we develop insight and calm abiding and so forth, I think that we can still think of our involvement with people in our society, in our family unit, our place of work, and so forth, and recognize that some of the behavioral tendencies that we develop do have a strong potential to lead us to the miserable realms. I remember that when I was working as a software engineer in Israel, the work environment was it was so, I would say, toxic. It was so common to ascend to high position through putting down others directly, right? So your way of getting a better job, getting a better salary, having a higher position wherever you look was basically to bitch about other people around you, right? So this kind of behavior leads to a lower realm from a kind of, at least from Shandeva's perspective. Sorry? Yeah.
And that's what they were saying, it's saying that that's completely about looking down on others, so looking at our superiors with jealousy.
Yeah.
To us, competitiveness,
Yeah.
those that are involved in themselves, so awful.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere in so many parts of society.
Yeah, it's kind of when we think of families, relationship and so forth, it's so difficult to avoid. Now, when I first heard about competitiveness also being one of the negative emotions, afflictions, kind of took me some time to work out, at least for myself, why competitiveness can be disturbing emotions. Because in some sense you can say that you have competitiveness in sports, wanting to excel in sports, wanting to excel in your studies, wanting to excel in your place of work. So why is it a disturbing emotion? Well, of course it disturbs your mind. It makes you to a certain degree unhappy and or not being able to dwell in a comfortable state.
And discontent.
Sorry?
Again, this discontent.
Yeah, there's a sense of discontent.
And there'll always be someone better.
Yeah, there will always be someone better than you. And it leads to those states in which you're seeking your own victory at the expense of kind of other people losing, which means that you're reinforcing your own sense of self-cherishing. And not just kind of self-cherishing, you completely ignore others to the point that even if it comes at the expense of others. So of course, if you do competitive swimming or whatever, then you need to be competitive. No. But then we can look at other areas in our life where we do compete with people for business or for other things to the detriment of others at some point.
Because sometimes competitiveness can grow, envy can kind of go, oh, I'd like to get that quality or so there's kind of some aspects of it that are good to more refined vibration.
Yeah. Well, with envy, actually, I think that in English, the word envy has a certain connotation. And when it is used from a Buddhist perspective, they take another spin on it, because it seems that envy brings together two afflictions, not only attachment, like I want what they have, but also it involves with hostility, like you're unhappy with what they have. So you can look at another person and think that they have such a good quality, I want to have something like that. So I'm envious of their good qualities. But then from a Buddhist perspective, a sense of envy also involves with a sense of animosity towards that person. You think I don't want them to have it, I want to have it. Yeah. Or rather than I don't want them to have it, it's more like I think that probably it's strongly related to covetousness. I wish I had some of it, or I wish I do better than them. I wish I have it and even more than them. That kind of stuff. It involves with a sense of animosity. Think that it's not right for them to have it.
So what is it when you look at somebody that has good qualities and want to be like them? Admiration.
Actually, it's involved also with faith. I mean, aspiration. There is, the kind of faith, when faith is glossed in general, faith is seeing a good quality of something that is endowed with such good qualities. So you have, when you look at minds and mental factors, the third type of faith is wishing faith, wishing for yourself to obtain those good qualities, which leads to aspiration. So you recognize the good qualities and you think, may I have those good qualities? So for example, we have faith in our spiritual teachers. The idea is that it's not that it's not the idea. The way to practice it is not just to have faith in them, but to wish to become like them. So I think that Geshe Tsultrim often says that, and also I think that it's found in our Guru Yoga text, may I become like you. Yeah, so that is the type of faith that we want to have. Lack of knowledge of causality also ties to envy. Yeah. All right, so if I'm led there to those unequal in fortune, what is the use of entrusting myself to the childish, right? Yeah, so what's the point of holding on to those relationships based on anger and attachment, jealousy, pride, competitiveness, if it leads me to the same situation, if it leads me to the miserable realms, but also if it leads me to a similar situation. So what's the point in being attached to it? So then looking at our relationship with the people that are around us, so then, whenever I travel home and with my family or with my friends and so forth, then the vast majority of them have no interest whatsoever in Buddhism. I find that it's difficult to avoid, to completely avoid discussions revolving anger and attachment and so forth. You inevitably have to to participate in some of those conversations. You might try to steer them away and so forth, but it's always a challenge, right? If you become too weird for them, if you're too weird, there's no kind of basis. You cannot relate to them; they cannot relate to you. So I think that probably for all of us, it's a challenge to find situations where we are not drawn towards those interactions based on anger and attachment and so forth, to try to steer it in ways that would be less damaging and more positive. Easier said than done. All right, so then, it's easier with your Buddhist friends, don't you find? So like, for example, here, at Buddhist centers, of course, we do end up sometimes having disagreements with others, or sometimes, unfortunately, we also gossip about each other or criticize each other, but still, it's easy to avoid that with like-minded people. When a conversation like that takes place and you said, actually, we're not doing it right, let's step back from that. Everyone, I think, will understand what you're saying. And everyone, I think, will feel that this is the right thing to do, even if they will not do it straight away. It's harder to do it with those that don't share the same ideas, right? So do not rely on the company of childlike people and the difficulty of doing so. Verses 10 and 11. So let's look at that. There's a lot of really nice advice that is found in this book. Maybe I'll just read here and there a couple of paragraphs, because I found it's a really nice section. Did you also find it? So it says in page 262, why associate with foolish beings who we have like children, when they lead us into states of desire and a lack of contentment with what we have? We become disinclined to study or to spurn defilement, and we cut ourselves off from the lineage of the Aryas, those who rely on their ragged robes, on little food, and on solitude. Again, think about it as someone, the author of this text was likely a monastic living in a monastery. Having few desires, the latter are satisfied with little, and they take delight in studying and in ridding themselves of defilements. It is thus that our present and future existences are brought to ruin by consorting with childish people. It's quite a weird way of saying that, consorting with childish people. Consorting means just to get into a normal relationship. It doesn't have to do with sex, right? It doesn't necessarily have to do with sex. All right.
Can just be like having feelings with somebody.
Okay. All right. So then, did we read through verse 10? Let's look at that. One moment they are friends, and in a while they become enemies. Since they become angry even at the source of joy, it is difficult to please ordinary people. They are angry when something of benefit is said, and they also turn me away from benefit. If I do not listen to what they say, becoming angry, they will proceed to lower realms. So I found that this commentary actually gives a really nice descriptions of those scenarios. So it says, such associates have no, let's see, am I reading from the right source? Yeah. Such associates have no constancy of mind and are always in search of something new. They are loving friends at one moment and bitter enemies the next. When you try to urge them to virtue, the source of happiness, they get irritated and rejected. If you are rich in Dhamma and ordinary possessions, things of which friends ought normally to rejoice, they are resentful and jealous. No matter what you do, it is hard to please ordinary people. If, with the best of intentions, you tell them to practice the Dhamma, something that will do them good, both in this and future lives, not only do they refuse to listen, but they lose their tempers. They say that they can't, and anyway, they have no time. I think that this is probably our role to say that we can't or that we have no time.
That's what we do.
Yeah, this is what we do. Yeah. All they do is dissuade you from the right course of practice of Dhamma by talking a great deal and creating all sorts of obstacles. If you turn a deaf ear to what they say, they get angry, which will only bring them down to the lower realms. It's quite kind of when I read through this section, I thought that it's not only that it's kind of those non-virtuous Dhamma friends that behave in such a way. It's mostly that we also behave in such a way, isn't it? So it's not only that we need to point at others, we can also point at ourselves.
So in that case, you shut yourself away completely. Right? Is that the advice? You just have to shut yourself away completely as a beginner?
Yes, that is the
Well, so the advice is coming, I think, in verse 16. So it says, let's look at that. Thanks, Frank. So then verses 12 and 13 say one does not obtain any benefit from it, but rather receives harm. So they're envious of superiors, competitive with equals. It's not much we need to read yet. They're envious of superiors, competitive with equals, and proud towards inferiors. They are conceited when praised, and if anything unpleasant is said, they get angry. When is any benefit obtained from the childish? Through associating with the childish, non-virtue will certainly ensue, such as praising myself and belittling others and discussing the joys of cyclic existence. Yeah, we do that quite often, don't we? So, when in... Yeah.
Like it's a very easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right.
Yeah, it's like, Lama Tsongkhapa said in the three principal aspects of the path, when there is no attraction whatsoever to the excellences of samsara. Now, so we have so much attractions to all the fun in samsara, going on holidays, buying stuff, hanging out with friends, having good food and so forth. And we talk about it with others, right?
It's not bad. You're doing it really bad.
It's not that it's kind of, it's not that it's bad as like evil thing, but it's still, the more we speak about it, the more we engage with that, the more we relish that, the more we stay entrenched in samsara.
And also it's actually
Or we get entrenched.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, kind of, I find that, for us, it sounds really confusing. It's that we, I find that one part of my mind is seeking liberation and enlightenment, and another part of my mind wants to go on holidays, want to hang out with friends. So I have foot in both camps, and I'm bogged still in the samsaric end rather than kind of bogged in the liberation end. So when in the company of their peers, childish people are jealous. They cannot stand anyone better than themselves. The vine compete with their equals, and they arrogantly ignore or poke fun at those who are below them. If they are praised, they become conceited and pretentious. If they hear unpleasant references to their own defects, they seethe with rage. What good was ever to be had from consorting with such childish people? If we are not Aryas, we are childish. This is to say that we are ordinary sentient beings. And if we consort with other childish or ordinary sentient beings, every kind of vice is sure to follow. When directly or indirectly, there will be I don't know how to say that word, it's so self-grandiose. Yeah, self-aggrandizement. How do you say that? Self-aggrandizement. Yeah. Anyway, you become too full of yourself. You think that you're fantastic. And contempt for others. There will be talk about the good things of samsara. We'll find ourselves protecting the people we find attractive and getting the better of those we dislike. We'll get involved in business and farming, discussing horses and livestock, provisions, clothing, and other commodities. Even chance meetings at corners or street can elicit non-virtuous behavior, cold looks, I like it, cold looks, and harsh expressions. So this is what happens when you consult with the childish.
I like the way it's so different.
Yeah.
Like you talked about just meeting someone on the street corner and getting carried away.
Yeah. Talk about farming and horses. So then the synopsis and the way to abandon them others and I relying upon each other in this way will bring about nothing but ruin. That's the bottom line. So if you believe in the bottom line, there you go. Those interactions based on attachment, but we can also say anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth. I mean, not based on them, those which engage with them on and on and on, will ruin oneself and others in general. But in this context, it will also mean that you will not have the conditions for developing karma binding. You'll have conditions that will interrupt or hinder your spiritual progress. That's the bottom line. So then with respect to the way to abandon them, it says, they will not enact my purpose, and I too will not enact their purpose. I should flee far away from childish people. When they are encountered, I should please them joyfully. So this is, I thought, is really kind of, I think, important to keep in mind, because sometimes you get the sense that in not engaging with those interactions which involve with anger, attachment, and so forth, that you should completely remove yourself from society, or that you should cut your ties with other people. So of course, when you practice karma abiding or do a certain retreat, it's best actually to be isolated, or to do a retreat with people that have the same interest, the same inclination, doing the same retreat, so that your focus will be still held tightly. But for us, in other circumstances, then it's best to avoid situations where our afflictions are triggered. But then, rather than becoming nasty to people or kind of being cold-hearted to them, it says here, even when you meet them, just do that joyfully, kind of still act in a cordial way, in a joyful way, rather than kind of being cold-faced, giving someone a cold look. So I should behave well, merely ordinarily, without becoming greatly familiar. So that's an interesting point. Without becoming greatly familiar, is if thing that the commentary says it kind of to think that you're meeting that person for the same time. I think that's actually has a refreshing point to it, kind of rather than meeting someone with all your mental overlays all your projection about the person. If you can meet that person every time anew, that's going to be less judgmental. It's easier said than done, isn't it? But Geshe mentioned that point today about how if you create a certain relationship with your sponsors, with your patrons, with those who give you food and so forth, it's hard to maintain that connection in a pure way without having expectations, without thinking that I need to be nice to them and so forth. It's pretty difficult. Now, when I was visiting Taiwan or other centers, sometimes the attitude that people have towards lamas or monks and so forth is that if they belong to that center, then only the sponsors of that center can invite them for food, can take them out for lunch, can take them out for a tour. If someone else invites them, it's like the knives are out. It's like, it becomes like a major crisis. So, it's kind of, sometimes I think of how it would be like, for example, if people invite you to give teachings, to give talks, to do a certain practice, but you always have to tread on, to tread on eggshells. It's like, make sure that you do not offend anyone because there are expectations. So here in a kind of in a more specific way for the development of shamatha, it says that actually when you think of how you create those situations where you also don't feel obliged to participate in a certain thing which will create some disruption for you, or also will give rise to a sense of attachment, or that you will also find yourself in a situation where you have to engage with those ordinary relationships, it's better actually to step back from that. And mentally you can say that, pretend as if you're even not familiar with that person. It's easier said than done. One person that I think that is really good in doing that is Lingam Rinpoche. Kind of his, I guess that being such a high lama and so many people wanting attention from him, he had to train himself for a young age to know how to cut the ties in an early stage, or kind of the interaction is finished, or the conversation is finished, so let's finish and move on. Kind of let's cut through the hand holding kind of thing. It's really good in doing that, not in a vicious way, in a really cordial way. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. Yeah.
The thing that keeps coming up in my mind is how we match this with the idea of seeing authentic beings with our mothers and being very kind to them.
Yeah.
And I know it's a mental process that we don't like
Yeah.
And then this is advice for a specific thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when we see authentic beings with our mothers, it's like we feeling affection towards them, maybe familiar with them, so we know how to life that she has.
Yeah.
So, and I know they're not true, but it just keeps coming up.
Yeah, it is confusing, and sometimes when I think of things like that, what helps me is to think of what will the Dalai Lama do, what will Lama Zopa Rinpoche do, what will Siddha Rinpoche do. Now it seems that when you look at them encountering people, they do that with a great sense of affinity. Yeah, they're friends, like someone that is really dear to the heart, and they have absolute attention to that person, 100% attention and care, and then they move on.
So I think this maybe is more of a mindset that we have. So we are affectionate people and care about them.
Yeah.
But then when we walk away, we don't have that sense of
that
we have to keep connecting to that person. Like we've done our best in that moment. And then we can walk away with a sense of not carry that familiarity.
Yeah.
We have mind.
It's so hard to walk away, isn't it? Kind of when I, at least sometimes when I think of it's time to walk away, I think of what would that person think? Would they like me if I walk away? Or how do I walk away and kind of still not create an awkward situation? It'd be nice to know how to do it skillfully. Yeah. So, it says in the commentary, what verses do we read through? Just 14, 15, 16. Only an increase of negativity, only the ruin of this and future lives can be the result of such connections. Relationships with such people bring us no benefit, either now or in the future, and we in turn are incapable of doing any good to them. We should therefore intend to avoid company of childish friends, relatives, and the other intimates whom we like, and we should aspire to stay in solitude, alone, and far away from them. So again, I think that this is very specific to the cultivation of absorption, but also in general, when we think about how we bring it into everyday life, I think that, as you said, kind of you have a positive interaction with others. You want to be as helpful, beneficial as much as you can, but also to be able to step back and continue on without kind of feeling that you have to hold on to that. Easier said than done. There is a saying that goes, the love of our relations is a sign of the celestial demon. Meeting our dear friends is the demon who cuts down our virtuous deeds. Talking is the treasure house of sin, the door of faults and downfalls. And according to other sayings, in lonely, unfrequented places, all one's works are virtues. Reflecting thus on the defects resulting from associating with friends and on the good qualities of resorting to solitude, we should take to heart what Milarepa said. When I'm sick, there is no one who will fret for me. When I die, there is no one who will weep. If in this mountain solitude I died, the wishes of this yogi will have been fulfilled. If it happens that we meet friends and relatives while in the solitude of the mountains, we should greet them merrily, that is, with pleasant speech and other gestures, just for that one occasion, without inviting any kind of lasting relationship, whether affection or resentment. We should keep on terms of pleasant courtesy, free of either attachment or aversion. Yeah, so it's a good advice, but it's really hard to implement, isn't it?
When you have a joyous interaction, also that person wants to be good.
Yeah.
So, okay, great.
Yeah. Let's meet up for coffee again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll leave it here for now, but I just wanted to read something with respect to verse 16. Is that right? So it says, so verse 16 says, like a bee that does not harm the blossoms of scent or hue, but sips the nectar and departs, that sage goes into town. It's not the actual verse, but it's similar to what the verse says. Anyway, as the text says, if there is a need to go visit a village, whereas in search of alms for monastics, or in order to read the scriptures and performing ceremonies, we should be like that bee that can take nectar from the flower without disturbing its color or perfume and fly away again without attachment. We should take only a few possessions in the way of food and clothing, and only what is consonant with the Dhamma, treating those who help us like first-time acquaintances without encountering familiarity or encouraging, familiarity, the source of both attachment and aversion. So this is probably directly related to what you said, Shannon, kind of without encouraging that sense of familiarity. Easier said than done again. So with that, let's leave it here for now. I will send out review questions later on today or tomorrow morning. And do you feel ready to go into kind of an exam or assessment once a fortnight? Is it all right? Okay. Even if you're not all right with that, I'm going to do it. So thank you very much. Let's do some dedication prayers. Due to this virtue, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all transmigrated beings without exception to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhisattva not yet born arise. May that no reason not decline, but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chum resident in Gyatso, please remain at this samsara end. You uphold the subduer's moral way, who says in the battlefield bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Marjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, protectors of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katsun.
That we have till next Friday to do it.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for reminding me. So for those people who are here and also people online that haven't been here before, so we have like a 2 weekly exam system, but it's not that strict. So the idea is that I send review questions every week. And the exam is made of the questions from the review questions. So it is part of the FPMT guidelines for conducting the basic program. So we have an option of doing one exam at the completion of each module or each topic, which requires a lot of study. Or you can do it either weekly or fortnightly exams, which is the format that we chose because it's also easier to kind of keep on track with the material. So I've sent out review question last week. I also sent some review questions from this week today. So of course you can look at your text, discuss it with friends. Then I'll send the exam. Do the exam, you return. So I try to send it normally by Sunday evening or Monday, and you have the whole week to do it till Friday or Saturday. What did we used to do with Friday? Till Friday? Yeah. And the idea is not to freak out. Just use it as a joyful way of studying, reviewing the material. Thank you.